All right, Hans, Involvation. So keep track of the time, please.
Will do.
Yeah, please do. Thanks.
Okay, thanks Martijn. Good afternoon by now. My name is Hans van der Drift, partner at Involvation. I've got a background at Unilever, worked there for many years. And again, for many years, I'm not going to say how many because then I give away my age. Been a partner at Involvation. So what I'd like to do is, in this brief slot, is to explore a little bit integrated business planning. A term that's been around for quite a while. I'll use a case study that we've worked on in the Netherlands recently to use that. Which one am I going? Okay, so what I'd like to do is briefly introduce companies, and then we'll talk about IBP. And maybe as a spoiler alert, the key message that I would like to get across is that IBP is a bit more than just converting your S&OP process into value. And that is actually a whole world behind behind that acronym. So who's Involvation? Maybe not everybody knows. We are a supply chain consultancy specializing in supply chain management, based in the Build. We're about 20 people, and we work for quite a lot of different companies, small but also very large multinationals, as long as it's supply chain management. And I think in general we would focus 60–70% of our assignments in S&OP or IBP related areas. Friesland Campina, I'm sure everybody knows. A large multinational company. Introduced them because the IBP design that we will be talking about, we made together with them. Maybe not everybody realizes that Friesland Campina has a very special challenge, and that is that their demand may be uncertain, but their supply side also has its dynamics, and it's a given that the supply is always going to come. Every day, so many million liters of milk need to be processed, and they need to go somewhere. So they will have always two sides of the puzzle. The one side is the demand-driven business, so what does the market want? But the other side is the supply-driven business, because if demand is lower than the supply, it's got to go somewhere. And actually part of the game that they need to play in their S&OP and IBP processes is to make sure that they get that balance right, and also that they maximize the value for their farmers. Maybe let's initially define IBP, and then see why we believe it's what the essence is. And that starts with looking at two cycles. So if we look at the first key management cycle in the company, very, very well established, the performance cycle, the financials, the budgeting, and the AOPs, and the latest updates, etc. Any company, any serious company will have a cycle like this. In a mature company nowadays, we will always also see an S&OP cycle that is also going through a loop, and that's also taking decisions around sort of a similar horizon. Now, when we talk IBP, one of the key messages people always say is it's one set of numbers. Now, who in this audience would believe that these two cycles are going to merge? So even the other way around, S&OP, we're going to bring it to value. Let's do one. Thanks, finance guys, but we will take over. Who would believe that? Who would not? It's election time, almost. Okay, who doesn't have an opinion? Almost everybody. I have an opinion because I don't believe it's going to happen. But somehow we need to bridge these two cycles, because of course when you have a planning cycle that looks when you have a planning cycle that takes a financial look, takes decisions for typically the end of the year, and we have a second cycle that's taking decisions for even longer, but also including that same horizon, how would you either align that, or otherwise it's going to be conflicts? How do we do this? In the end, with the objective to drive the very typical business results, which would be around optimizing gross profit. In Friesland Campina case, very high impact because of the supply push and the valorization of the milk, but also, of course, working capital, customer service. How do we really make the levers move? Now, what does that look like in practice? And one of the assumptions is that people we find typically take is that as long as we move our demand plan and bring that volume plan and bring that into value, this is sort of the essence of IBP. And what I believe, there's a bit more to it than that. So let's start it. In the Friesland project, we defined, in fact, 17 building blocks, smaller and bigger, that all build together over time will build the end-to-end IBP process. And the first one focuses on forecasting. And the first step would be to convert the sales plan into a value plan. So go from volume to value. So that's the basis. But then, of course, you start to do the gap recognition in IBP. We can go to, there's a discussion about, there's the local MBRs in the marketing verkoop organizations where they review the month end and they look into the end of the year. And we've got the S&OP process in value now. How will they work together? And that can only be done if your hierarchies are the same, if they're very, really technical, but if you look at the world in the same way. So you can't, as supply chain, look at technology, and then as business, look at categories or the marketing view. So somehow we need to align that. We need to organize the same way, because if we have a European or a regional supply chain and we have somehow coming across the categories and the marketing and sales organizations, how do we bring that together? And overall, we need to start talking the same language. So this is all around, I think, the first assumption that people would make. Quite some challenges, partly technical. How do we get to value? But specifically around organization, data, mindset, speak the same language. One big element. We've talked a lot about scenarios, and actually, again, sorry, the bullet didn't work so well here. But next to looking at the value plan on the sales side, we also decided let's make our supply side not only volume but also value. Now, why would you do that? Because part of the exercise was to standardize financial let's say the IBP scenarios. Now, why would you want to do that? I'll give a little example. For example, on the drivers that you use in different scenarios. Typically, what we would say in IBP is let's optimize gross margin. So we have a choice. We can send our milk here. We can make cheese of it. We can do this. How do we optimize our margin? In S&OP, I think that makes perfect sense. But in S&OE, I don't think it makes sense. Now, why would that be? Gross margin includes, and there's only an example, gross margin is based on, you look at your products and you include your fixed costs. Now, fixed costs, there's a reason that they're called fixed costs, they're fixed. You could argue in the midterm, S&OP horizons, I can change those fixed costs, but in the short term I cannot. So as part of the standardized scenario in S&OE, the short term, we said, well, forget about the fixed costs, let's only look at variable. And it's a really simple example where you could say, well, if we define a scenario in S&OE, this is your template, this is a typical trade-off that you need to make, this is the data that you use, and this is the financial KPI that you're going to optimize. And in this way, you could argue that you can show that if you take, you really get different outcomes, and therefore we could also show that you then thereby create more value than if you would let everybody just get along with it and come up with it themselves. Okay, so, and therefore also the risks and opportunities. Risks could be, well, we're not going to get less milk, or we don't have the demand. Opportunities would be, we could sell it in Asia, we can do a promo, etc. And if you financialize those and bring this all together, you really get different answers than otherwise. Okay, then there's a third block, and it's all around strategy and innovation. So how would we include portfolio management? For example, a simple example, tail cutting. Do we leave that to the business? Do we leave that to innovation? Or do we include that in our IBP process to monitor portfolio health and give the IBP process the authority to delist certain SKUs? How do we integrate? Innovation process includes capacity planning. S&OP or IBP is doing capacity planning. Well, how do they interact? So that whole pillar also comes into the picture if you really want to get everything across. And then there's, of course, the CapEx integration. And then the last part, and this is, I think, this is also where modern systems come really into place, is if we want to really drive end-to-end performance, so from the milk from the farmer to when it sits at the customer, What do we do with incentives? Again, simple example. I work in a marketing sales organization. My incentive is to maximize my gross margin or my P&L for my local organization. So the GM in that organization says, well, this is what I'm going to do. Let's, for example, kill all my promotions. It's good for my margin. But that means that, that the volume is going to go down. So now I've got this milk push. Where does it go? So this decision might be good for the local marketing sales organization, but it's not so good for the end-to-end supply chain of the whole company. So as long as I leave the incentives the way they are, it's going to be really difficult to get optimal decisions. So I first will need to take a look at those incentives. I then need to make sure that if I run my scenarios, I can really make them end-to-end. What about working capital? Because that's not in your margin. What do I do? And then finally, therefore, I need the balanced scorecard or an IPP dashboard to make sure that I'm looking at the right figures. And in the end, overall, you want to be looking for better decisions and see the impact on your P&L. Okay, let's skip this one. Now the advantage, so why did we make all these building blocks? Because it might look a bit overly complex. And that's that step by step, all these elements of volume to value conversion in itself is quite a big project to really get it to the level where you want it to be. And by thinking big, so this is where you want to go to, but making smaller steps, smaller building blocks in the project, we will enable that you can take small steps, take it the agile way and see, well, does it work? Does it help? Does it deliver? And then let's move on to the next building block. Okay, so where do we stand? We made this whole design and the setup, and then, as you will have seen in the papers, Vision decided to change the organization. Now we started right at the beginning that the organizations in S&OP, the way you look at the world, and on the commercial side, the way you look at the world, have to be aligned. So therefore, we said, well, let's first park this IPP process for now, and first reorganize the basic S&OP process to make sure it's in line again, and then we'll revisit again. So therefore, part of the building blocks will be included on the fly, but for now they've been parked. But once this phase is over, we will pick up the project again, and then I'm sure we will reap the benefits. So wrapping up, if you look at IBP, the way we look at IBP, people often say it's one set of numbers. Correct, it is one set of numbers, but there's a whole lot more to it than just let's make a P times Q calculation and say, well, this is my volume plan. Now you all of a sudden have my value plan, and now we're done. And by defining smaller blocks, you can really eat the elephant one bite at a time, make it manageable, and during the process already, you can prioritize and therefore get the benefits before you really have to complete the full project. Any questions?
During lunch.
During lunch.
Okay.
No questions allowed. Sorry.
No. Not for now. Sorry.